Get ready for a fun night. So today we're going to be talking quickly about, here in 20 minutes, about 4 things that you should stop doing in SharePoint, that everybody does in SharePoint, but maybe you need to stop doing those things and look at doing some of those in Azure now. A little bit about myself before we jump in. My name is Mark Rackley. I work for an organization called Pate Group. I'm one of the owners, and we do SharePoint and Office 365 planning, mentoring, deployment, lots of other stuff. There's my contact information, so if you want to follow me on Twitter or email me afterwards, have any questions, feel free to reach out. Love hearing from people when you have nice things to say. If you have mean things to say, my boss Stephanie's back there, so you can just let her know about it. Wave, Stephanie. Yeah, she's right there. So here's the thing. SharePoint is awesome, right? SharePoint's amazing. We've been doing SharePoint for years, but the problem is people try to treat SharePoint like the silver bullet, the thing that's going to solve all of our problems, right? And they start implementing things that maybe they shouldn't have. They try to customize pages they shouldn't customize. They go down rabbit holes of creating really complicated solutions and trying to shoehorn it into SharePoint. You know, I like to say that the biggest problem, the reason for most of the bad experiences in SharePoint is because of bad behaviors in SharePoint, people doing things that they should not have done. And so Azure has a lot of really cool services that we can look at using to do some things in that we shouldn't be doing in SharePoint that will make the SharePoint experience better, and they'll make and can maybe even save you a lot of time and money as well. So we do a lot of deployment planning in SharePoint. We sit down and we talk to customers every day, talking about how we can move you into SharePoint Online, how we can update your intranets, what can we do to make your life better. And without a doubt, the single biggest complaint we get from every single company is users can't find what they're looking for, right? They can't find it. They don't know where to go for policies and procedures. Their search is just not configured well. And even it's just, they struggle because if they can't find that special keyword that they're just trying to use, then it's not going to come back with the correct search result, and they get really frustrated. So for our first suggestion, instead of using a wiki page or an FAQ page in SharePoint, maybe you should look at using a Q&A bot, right? These are very easy to set up now, and using a tool called Q&A Maker, you can go there right now. You can set up a bot in 5 minutes that you can then deploy to SharePoint. You can deploy to Teams. You can deploy to a lot of different places. And what it does is it allows users to interact with the bot using natural language. So they can just talk how they talk to the bot and get a response back. And because of the cognitive services underneath the covers there, the bot will actually determine what the person's intent is. So if you have a FAQ on vacation policies, and the person asks, well, what's our vacation policies? The bot will respond like, here's our vacation policies. But it's also smart enough to say, if they type in, you know, I want to take some time off. Well, it's smart enough to know, oh, they're talking about vacation. I'm going to return some vacation responses. So the user doesn't have to know the exact keywords to put in. They don't have to remember which page it was on. They can just very naturally speak to a bot, and then they can get the responses that they're looking for. So they can get through them faster, less frustration. So when you're setting up a bot in Q&A Maker, one of the things you're going to notice is that you can specify what do you want to use to seed your bot, what's going to be in that knowledge base. And you can actually just give it the URL of any existing FAQ you may have, or maybe a wiki page that you have. And it'll actually go to that page, and it will turn the content on that page into a question and answer scenario. Or you can even upload an Excel spreadsheet that has questions and answers. So this way, maybe you don't want to give some admin access to the Q&A Maker, but you can say, here's a spreadsheet of questions and answers. Update this for me of what we want to have the bot respond with for questions and answers, and we'll upload that. And then the bot will be able to take those questions and then interpret variations of those questions automatically. You can also, in Q&A Maker, give your bot a personality. So the bot can respond to common phrases like, hello, how are you doing? And you can even specify what kind of personality do you want to give the bot. Maybe you have a laid-back environment, so you can make it a witty bot, or maybe you have more of a stuck-up organization that doesn't like to have fun, and you can use a professional bot. So you've got options for however your organization wants to work. And then once you deploy that bot into Azure, you have the option of adding it to different channels. And this is where you can use that bot. So by default, you have a web chat. And this gives you a piece of embed code that you can place on any website you have today. You could place that into SharePoint. You could place it on a WordPress site, and you can start using that bot immediately. And you can see here that I've also configured this bot to work in Microsoft Teams, and you have options to make it work in Facebook, Skype. So you've got a lot of options to where that Q&A Maker bot can work with very little effort. The other cool thing is if you've got developers on staff, and you're like this Q&A bots, we want to make it more powerful, you can actually go into Azure and you can download the source code for your bot. And you can use the bot framework, open it up in Visual Studio, make your customizations, and then redeploy that bot to maybe make it reach into other business systems, and really make it powerful. So we're going to do a demo here in a second. And in that demo, I pointed my Q&A Maker to this vacation wiki that I found online. This was just I did a search for vacation wiki, pointed Q&A Maker at this URL, and we're going to see what happens whenever that happens and how Q&A Maker handles that. So just a quick glance at that so you can see what we're saying. And let's jump over into that demo. So I'm going to come over here into Teams, assuming the screen comes back. So let's jump over here into Teams. And here I am interacting with this bot in Teams. And again, I could have interacted with this bot in SharePoint or any web application, but I'm using Teams. So I can say, hello. The bot's going to respond with, hi. And I can say, how are you doing? And it says, awesome, thanks for asking. And that's that personality that was given the bot by me just specifying a certain personality. But now I can say, well, wait a second, who is eligible for vacation? And it says regular and full-time, regular part-time staff are eligible. So it understood what I was asking. It gave me the response. So maybe I can say, what is, or how does staff accrual for, if I could spell accrual, for vacation work? Here's the accrual. Here's how people accrue vacation. So I mean, it's able to say, and I can say, okay, well, what about vice presidents? Vice president accrual. It says, well, they accrue 4 weeks of paid vacation, right? So it's able to, all I did was give it that URL. It is now able to understand the questions I'm asking and give me back the appropriate information within Teams, okay? And like I said, you can start using this in 2 minutes. You can point it to an existing FAQ or upload something to SharePoint. Okay, any questions? Tough, we don't have time for questions. Sorry. All right, so let's go to the next. So what's next? So what's the last thing you should do with this? Why don't you create your own Q&A Maker bot? Just go to qamaker.ai, play with it. You'll see how easy it is to get started. Then you download the source code. Look at editing it. Also, you can download the bot framework and create your own bots from scratch if you want to. Learn about Lewis.ai. That stands for language understanding, and that's going to be the main intelligence that determines what is the user, what's their intention when they ask a question. And that's something you can configure and train yourself. If you really want to get into this stuff, I do have a workshop coming up at the upcoming SharePoint conference in Las Vegas next year. So you can go to sharepointna.com and even use my last name for a discount. So if you want to learn more about it, I'll see you guys there. So the next thing we're going to talk about, how many people want to take their existing file shares and just throw them into a SharePoint document library? All the time, right? Let's take this 5 terabytes of stuff we haven't touched in 10 years, but we don't want to lose it, so we're going to stick it in SharePoint. And now we're going to pollute our entire search. Nobody can find what they're looking for, and we just took our same mess we had in a file share, and we put it into a document library in SharePoint. Well, instead of doing that, you really should look at using Azure Blob Storage. SharePoint's for collaboration. It's for active documents. It's for documents you know you're going to need to find today. It's not for those documents that are archived that you seldom need access to. So the cool thing about Azure Archive Storage is you can get the storage for as low as 99 cents per terabyte per month, depending on your region. That's 200 times cheaper than storing that same content in a SharePoint document library. So Check it out. You can even set the tiers on the storage, so you can spend a little bit more on the storage if you want to get faster access to the files, but that's totally under your control. I don't have a demo for this because it's files. Yeah, how do you demo files, right? But you can get started by creating a storage account in Azure, and then look at some sort of migration policy in SharePoint. So maybe you've got a document library, and you want to move that into archive storage. And so here's what's pretty cool. You've got a document library in SharePoint, you're ready to archive it, and so you run an archive process that takes that document, moves it into an archive blob in Azure storage, but it converts that file in the document library to a link so that you still have all the metadata for that file. So now things like Project Cortex can still take advantage of that metadata. You can still get access to that information when you need it. So the users can still find it if they need it, but you move that cost out of SharePoint, and you just move some of that mess out of the way. So the next thing we're going to talk about is customizing SharePoint and SharePoint add-ins. Has anybody here ever written a SharePoint add-in? Exactly. Like almost nobody has created SharePoint add-ins. So instead of creating SharePoint add-ins, and instead of just over-customizing SharePoint because the marketing has to make it look exactly a certain way they want it to look, because I hate the sweet bar, I want to remove the sweet bar, I want to hide everything on the page, I just want it to be a full-page app. Well, instead of customizing SharePoint to death, look at using an Azure web app. These are actually insanely easy to get started with. And using a SharePoint add-in, they're pretty cumbersome. You've got to learn how to write a SharePoint add-in, and if you create one, they're not portable. So if your company decides you created this great SharePoint add-in, but hey, we're not going to be using SharePoint for our intranet anymore, well, guess what? You can't use that add-in anymore. But by using a SharePoint or an Azure web app, you can now take that functionality with you. And also stop customizing SharePoint to death. Stop hacking at it. Stop trying to make it look exactly the way you want. SharePoint looks great, by the way. Modern SharePoint looks awesome, but I know there's still people who want to make it look different. Well, stop trying to make SharePoint look different. Go create an Azure web app. You can create an Azure web app using Java, .NET, Python, PHP, and Node.js. So you have a lot of options for creating web apps, and you can still connect to that SharePoint data. You can connect to your line of business systems. You can get server performance and functionality of it. So with Azure Web Apps, you get true single sign-on so that you can easily, you don't have to worry about giving users double sign-in. It's very seamless to the users. You get a lot of enterprise functionality, and you get automatic scalability in case you need a web app that needs a lot more server processing. So it's really cool. So I'm going to quickly show you an Azure Web App here. And what I've done is I have an Azure Web App that I have deployed to my SharePoint page, and this is the Azure Web App here running as an embed on a modern SharePoint page. And what it's doing is it's showing a list of zip codes from another SharePoint list. And if you look, it's actually, you can't really read that very well, but there are 42,000 entries in this list. So this web part read 42,000 items from a SharePoint list in another site collection and displayed it on this page to the user. And now the user can go through and they can search for specific zip codes, and they can interact with that web part. And let's say, though, you don't want to use this inside SharePoint. Well, it's an Azure web app, so you can use it standalone in its own page as well. And people can use this outside of SharePoint if you want to, but it's still accessing SharePoint content. And the user doesn't have to sign in twice when it's on that SharePoint page. But it is secured with Azure AD, so if a user tries to open that page up without being authenticated, it is going to prompt them to log in. So this is secure. It is secure, authenticating the user using Azure AD to the content that's on SharePoint, or maybe, like I said, your line of business systems, or something else you need access to. So what's next here? Create an Azure web app. Like I said, it'll be interesting to see how easy it is to get started. And you can also looking at Azure AD app registration, and that's what's going to give your Azure web app access to the different resources, access to the graph, access to SharePoint, access to your line of business systems. Embed that, create a web part, embed it in a SharePoint page, or maybe create a highly customized application and do some cool stuff with it. So next, we're going to go more and talk about the SharePoint framework. Now, a lot of times in the SharePoint framework, to access other systems, we need to create a web service to actually reach into that system, or maybe we just need to call a web service to get some information. The problem is, when we call those web services, a lot of times it's anonymous APIs using API keys, right? And anybody who just calls those using the SharePoint framework, those APIs are exposed to whoever's watching, looking at the page. So someone could easily get your API key for your endpoint, take advantage of it, and start using it to create their application. So it's not very secure. So instead of calling those web services in the SharePoint framework directly or creating your own web service, look at using an Azure function and then using something like the Azure Key Vault to store those keys. One of my favorite things about using Azure Function is it gets around that headache of cores, like every developer out there who's had to fight the cross-site problems. Using Azure Key Function, or Azure Functions, you can get away from those cores issues. It's server-side code, so it's fast. It's going to be a lot faster than just writing client-side code in the SharePoint framework. You can hide keys in the Key Vault so that users cannot know what those APIs are. You can add additional authentication to those Azure functions. And you can call Azure functions in web parts and logic apps and PowerShell. There's a lot of ways to actually call those Azure functions, although for our demo, we're going to be doing it in a SharePoint framework web part. So let's quickly do a demo here. So on my page, I also have two web parts. We have two translation web parts. Welcome to Translate and welcome to Translate Azure Function. And both of these SharePoint framework web parts are calling into the same Azure Translator API. However, this web part is calling the web service directly, and this one is using an Azure function to make the same call. So I can type in some text. I can say, hello, how are you? And you can see it is being translated as I type it. And I can also type in over here and say, hello, I like bacon. You can see that it's translating that as well with the Azure function. So however, if we open this up and look at it, let's look at our developer tools and go to our network traffic. If I start typing in something here, can I ask you a question? And we look at those web service calls that are happening in our network traffic. If I click on one of those, I can see immediately what the endpoint is to that API for the translator. And if I keep scrolling, I even see what the API key is here. So anybody reading that page, don't write that down, by the way. Anybody looking at this page can get that API, get that endpoint, and then they can call into the API themselves. And a lot of these endpoints aren't free. So someone else could be using your key, charging your Azure account if they really wanted to. And it would be difficult to be able to, that could be difficult to find out and stop them until you got a big bill, okay? But if we go and look at the same network transactions for the Azure functions, we can look at those. And we do have our request URL for the Azure function, but there's no API key. There's no way to know what the API key is. And if a user tries to go directly to this URL because they want to use it, they're getting prompted to log in. So it's secure. You've got additional security behind this. That security is seamless to the user when using the SharePoint framework web part, but if they try to use that endpoint on their own, they're going to get prompted to log in and use that. So you get that security there as well. So what's next with Azure Functions? Look at using things like the Azure Key Vault to store those keys. Create an Azure function. Again, this stuff is relatively easy to get started with. You'll be surprised. And the power there with the server-side code especially is really going to make it easy to create some really cool functionality in SharePoint using Azure. So yeah, so that was 20 minutes. That was 4 things you guys should stop doing. You guys going to stop doing any of those things, or you just got to rest your feet for a while? Good. There you go. Good. So stop fighting SharePoint. Stop trying to make SharePoint something it's not. Take advantage of Azure. Get an Azure subscription. You can actually get 12 months free by signing up. There's a lot of free services out there for it too. And start building things today. Thank you.